Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and we examine them through the lens of scripture. I have a guest on today, and we're going to talk about the education system. And for those of you that have been following me for a while, you know that I am a teacher from the public education system. So I've seen it all. I've in California, by the way, have to mention that because I feel like there is like ground zero for some of this stuff. But today I have someone who's going to come on, Corey Miller. He's going to talk to us about the Miseducation of America. And the Progressive Miseducation of America, his new book. And I'm really looking forward to having this. This is like a topic that as a teacher, you just love to dig into. But as a parent, you need to be aware of what's happening out there. And maybe even those of you who are considering college and what that might look like for you. So, Corey, I'm looking forward to talking about the thing that I'm passionate about, education. So, welcome to the show.
Fantastic. I'm passionate about that as well. And so I think we resonate, and my interests now are in the areas of faith, reason, and the integration of culture.
Awesome. Well, that's perfect. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do before we get into like the nitty gritty of the book.
Sure. So I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah as a seventh generation Mormon. One of my ancestors was Joseph Smith's bodyguard. And as one person has told me, he wasn't doing his job, apparently. But I grew up there, became a Christian at a camp in California during high school, moved to California, lived there with a Christian family, got discipled, went back to Utah to graduate my senior year of high school. And that's when the pressure was on to reread the Book of Mormon, this time for the sake of truth, not seven generations of tradition. And I did, and that's when I found that it was severely lacking, and made me glad that I'd made that change. But then I started to wonder, okay, now that I no longer believe in Mormonism and I've got this new faith in the Bible's biblical Christianity, um, I always was taught that the Bible was problematic because we believe the Bible, as far as it's translated correctly, goes the eighth article of faith in Mormonism, which means that it's not translated correctly and you can't really trust it. But don't worry about it because the guys downtown in the office buildings of the church, the apostles and prophets, they've got you covered. But I no longer believe in that. So what am I going to do about this book? And how do I know that God is even real? Maybe I just had an experience. How do I know God is real? And if so, which God? And so that sent me into a small period of skepticism. I was introduced to the field as I'm looking at comparative religions and philosophy and science. I came across apologetics. And it really substantiated me now in this faith that the Christian faith is a reasonable faith. And I remember trying it out in my classroom for the first time at Salt Lake Community College, only to be kicked out of the class, receiving an F for what they said was proselytizing. I was only doing what the professor was doing. But I went legal with that, and the president forced the professor to put me back in the classroom, give me an A for the semester as long as I shut up. So we had an agreement. But that was my first kind of encounter in college. I was not an academic by any means. I had a 0.666, I kid you not, on a GPA one time. But now that I was a Christian, I saw that Jesus said the purpose of life is to know God. Knowledge is not something that is peripheral to the Christian life, it's central. And so, needing to know truth, that made it all the more existentially important and vital for me, having come out of Mormonism. And so, I ended up going off to Bible college, seminary, pastored for a while. I was getting claustrophobia. I needed to be at the universities. So I switched from biblical studies to philosophy down at Talbot, did an MA there, and then went off to back into the church setting for a while. Claustrophobia again. I needed to get to the university. So I got accepted at Purdue University back in 2004, and I began the doctoral program in philosophy there. Really hard time, got all the way through it until 2009. I was all but dissertation and told I had too much of a faith perspective. So I ended up having to terminate with a 5-year master's degree, only to go on for a second time for a PhD, joined a faculty ministry at the time, running the faculty ministry at Purdue, continued to teach at IU and Indiana University campus for about a dozen years in total in philosophy and comparative religions. But then I finished my PhD through a British institute because they're dissertation only. And at this time, I had 3 master's degrees. So 2 months later, I got a call from this organization called Ratio Christi. And they had a job opening. And I said, I'll take it. What is it? President. Okay, don't know anything about that, but let's go. So that was 10 years ago. And so here I am at Ratio Christi as president today.
Can you tell us what Ratio Christi, what you guys do over there?
Yeah, first we have to confuse people and use Latin terms. So it means the reason of Christ. And so it's not the Ratio Dei, the reason of God. It is a Christ centered ministry. We focused intently on apologetics evangelism on the campuses. I say what separates us from every other apologetics ministry out there is that we're on the campus, the most influential institution shaping civilization without question right now. And what separates us from the other campus ministries, then, to distinguish our own unique lane, is that we do apologetics evangelism. If someone needs a hug, we give them a hug. But if they need an argument, we are the ministry on campus to give them an argument. So we are on 100 plus college campuses in the US, about 15 countries, other places. We have a high school division that works with churches and Christian schools and home groups, stuff like that. And then we have a professor's division, and most recently a PhD student-only division that we're trying to fund PhDs to get into top 100 universities to, over a period of 40 to 50 years, reclaim some central ground on the university campuses.
Yeah, I love that you guys are doing that because, in one, I have boys 22, 20, and 15. So in one respect, I'm like, I don't even want my kids going to the universities anymore. But then I don't, sometimes I think that's probably not the right way to think about it because you don't want Christians leaving all of these institutions. That's how you get a takeover of like secularism. And I feel like that's why we've lost them to like Harvard and Yale and these other universities that were grounded in and started by Christians anyway. So it's like then you leave them and you leave them to people who are doing terrible things.
Yeah.
But I love that you guys are there on campus and you're having these conversations with college students. And I think it should be encouraging. Like parents who are listening should, like, if they think about that, maybe even when you're looking for a college, they could think or look for ones where Ratio Christi is a part of and get their kids connected because that would be a
Right.
great
Right.
lifeline.
Yep.
Well, okay. So many things are like, I turn in my mind where I'm like, which direction do I want to go first? But when you're talking about the education system, you're talking about it. What's happening is a cultural revolution. When I think of that word, I think of like Marxism, that's where I'm attaching it to I don't know. I just, not that necessarily that when you say cultural revolution, that's it, but you can clear this up for me because this is why I'm trying to get to a stinking question here. But when did you first realize that something had fundamentally shifted with the university's education, and what was the turning point for you? Now, I know you guys are on campuses, so you're probably seeing a lot of things from the inside that we only hear about like on the news and what's happening on different campuses throughout the country. But what would you say that culturally when this shifted?
Yeah, and you're right. I've written a book on this topic recently, looking at what just happened to America. This is no longer grandma's America. We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. What in the world just happened? And everyone can see it. The political schema is just so different now that you have Democrats, Kennedys, Musk, Joe Rogan that are now in the Republican Party, and you've got Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner, who recently ran for governor in California as a Republican, supported by the RNC.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is crazy what is going on here. And what is going on here is that the Democrats and Republicans have collapsed into one because the Democrat Party has been taken over by Marxist thinking. and those are the ones driving it. But it's not just happened yesterday. How did this happen? The second third of the book gets into that. Didn't we start the universities? Yeah, we did. You mentioned Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, and so forth. I've been to all of those universities. I can see things on their campuses that other people will never see by just looking at their website. They've scrubbed their histories there, but the histories are etched into their buildings. And, so I tell the history of that and how we lost the universities in the first wave revolution, and then in the second wave revolution. And then the book is, well, then what do we do about it? How do we respond? But it is crystal clear, so I can get into more detail on that if you want, but it is crystal clear that we are in a revolution. I've studied all the major revolutions, and unlike the frontal assault in the Russian Revolution and the Chinese revolutions, they had to do things a bit differently in the West, and that took some time for them to methodically plan out. But that is actually what's been going on and what's happening right now before our eyes.
Okay, so I agree with you that we are in a revolution. I mean, obviously, you can see the cultural shift. And my thing, I'm wondering, out of curiosity, where do you see this going? Like, end? What is the? I mean, do we have as Christians, do we have a role to play where we can say, hey, let's stop this, take this back? I mean, what's the solution?
Well, yeah, I think when Paul says um, to beware of false philosophy, you first have to be aware of false philosophy. You
Mm.
have to know what it is. And so C.S. Lewis said, study philosophy, if for no other reason than to counter bad philosophy. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. And the scripture says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the true philosopher is the believing philosopher. But philosophy is a good thing if it's not false philosophy, if it's good philosophy. And as the medievals used to say, like Thomas Aquinas, that theology is the queen of the sciences, or the scientia, the knowledge disciplines, all of them. And philosophy is its handmaiden. In other words, if you can imagine a hub of a will, and it's extended from the hub, all of these various spokes, these diversity of spokes of language and biology and mathematics and history and so forth. Theology is the queen of the scientia, and philosophy is its handmaiden. It's the glue that holds it all in. So that behind every PhD is a doctor of philosophy, even if they've never taken a philosophy class before. They are consuming and producing some philosophical viewpoint about the world, about knowledge, and about the good life, about ethics. And so we started the universities. Harvard in 1636, the Pilgrims, the Puritans started it, and it was the goal for nearly 300 years. Their motto was truth for Christ and the church, veritas. So we have unity in veritas, diversity gives us the university, where you had this unified theology that has now been replaced by a theology. And so all the disciplines then took that philosophical set of assumptions and started spewing it out, and the professors started embracing it. So what happened was, for the first 200 years, we virtually all of the presidents of the public universities were also members of the clergy.
Mm.
They were smart people, and they taught the capstone class on moral philosophy the senior year for the students. But by 1880, now this, remember that Harvard started in 1636. Then you have Yale, then you have Princeton, then you have Columbia, all before 1776 even arises. So you had a lot going on in the colonial schools. But by 1880, we had no real graduate schools in America. And so we pushed our people, our brightest, over the pond to Europe, and typically to Germany, which was considered the most educated, formally educated country in the history of the world. People want to ask, how is it possible that the most formally educated country in the history of the world could have done what they did in the Holocaust? And I say, look at the universities.
Mhm.
Look at the universities. Ideas have consequences, and bad ones have victims. Good ones can create a civilization of flourishing. And I think that's what the West was built on, was You've got some Greco-Roman philosophy that was consistent with the Jesus movement, and there's a story of that conflation of how those came about and how the universities developed in Europe to begin with Cambridge and Oxford and Bologna and so forth, and then extended to Southeast Asia just 150 years ago into Africa. But during that time, 1880 to 1930, the battle was on. All the graduates are coming back from Europe, and that's where you have Immanuel Kant. You Kant no ultimate reality, he says. You get Schleiermacher, the father of modern liberal theology. You get Nietzsche, God is dead. You get Freud, the new sexuality. Hegel, you get Marx and Engels, biblical higher criticism. You get all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all, coming into our universities at the beginning, and it was the scientific naturalist revolution at the beginning. And so all of the disciplines started changing their names. Instead of politics, which is part of ethics, it was political science. And instead of psychology, the psychology, the study of the soul, it was now about the brain and central nervous system and called the Department of Psychological Sciences. So from 1880 to 1930 was the first ideological revolution. The second one, as the dust was settling in the 1930s, something new was brewing again in Germany. And this time, there was this little place called Frankfurt, Germany, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, critical race theory, critical queer theory, critical pedagogy, critical gender theory, critical climate theory, critical everything. If it's not critical thinking, it is Marx plus X. And Marx and Lenin loved the French Revolution. They salivated over it. They watched it. They saw the guillotine. They wanted revolution. They predicted revolution. Revolution did not come the way Marx thought. So the new Marxists came along in this Frankfurt School, these neo-Marxists, blending it with Freudian sexuality, and figured out a way to get into the West. And in 1933, when the National Socialists rose to power, most of the founders of this neo-Marxist movement were Jewish, and they were globalist socialists, not national socialists. They were Antifa, anti-fascists, and they didn't get along with the Nazis. And the Nazis won, at least initially. So they had to get out of town quick. And where did they go? Columbia University, UCLA, Brandeis, and other places starting to sow their wild seeds. Um, Meanwhile, you've got, their counterpart down in Italy, Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, one of the most radical, probably one of the most dangerous cultural Marxists, who never got out of prison because Mussolini had him in there for life. But his writings, his prison notes got out, and they got translated into the English-speaking world right here in the state I live in Indiana, at Notre Dame, by a Marxist professor named Joseph Buttigieg, father of Mayor Pete. So what you're finding there is not just homosexuality, you're finding queer theory, critical queer theory, and so forth, right? And that cultural Marxism realized, you know what, we're not going to be able to, why can't we topple the West? Western Europe, America, and so forth. Well, it's because it's like this castle and moat. Every time you're lobbing shells at it, it has like a cell that self-regenerates. There's something about it in its soft tissue. And so Gramsci distinguished between political society, military and law enforcement and government, and civil society, academia, media, ecclesia, church. And the cultural Marxists realized to get into the West, you have to culturally engage in the soft tissue of culture over time, a long march through the institutions. And that meant academia, media, and ecclesia, the churches. And so these people all came over into the West, including the founders of postmodernism, within 15 years of all of that. And yet the postmodernists, and I write about this in my book as well, every one of them for the first two generations, to the man, were either card-carrying members of the French Communist Party or sympathizers with it. So these are all naturalists, but moved into a postmodern cultural Marxism, which came over here. They ensconced themselves into our institutions. They talked about the long march through the institutions that began with all of their books out now and all of their disciples now populating all the top schools in the humanities this time, not the hard sciences. And they launched this cultural revolution, and that is what we're living in right now, the postmodern cultural Marxist Revolution. And it's so bad that they've been kicking out the old guard of scientific naturalism and taking over through the DEI or DIE programs, rather, math and medicine and engineering, and then quickly spawned out into the corporate world, into the media, into the churches, the seminaries, the
Mhm.
campus ministries, and Christian academic societies. So that the barbarians are no longer at the gates, they're in the citadel, and we are in a revolution in this country.
Mm. So that's thorough. Thank you. And interesting all at the same time. And so my question would be thinking through this, and maybe you also address this in the book, but for a quick answer, to I always look at, okay, what's the root of the problem? And I feel like the education system is just one of the institutions where we see this happening, but I think it is the most effective, like you said, because they have access to young minds, which are much more formative. And then I see Dr. George Barna's statistics about how the church itself is not discipling others to a biblical worldview. So you have this, access to the minds of these kids where the universities get to shape that. Do you think one of the solutions is not looking to change the institution of the education system, or another, choose another one, political, government, whatever, but to go back to the church itself and for the church to say, how do we get rooted into the truth of scripture and start discipling others to a biblical worldview? Like, well, is that the root of this problem where you want to start?
I mean, it's part of it. So I think you nailed it. You've probably seen the statistics then from Barna that show that for your audience, let me list what this means to hold a biblical worldview when Barna took this survey, because it's pretty profound and mind-boggling. According to the American Worldview Inventory, a biblical worldview is characterized this way: belief in God's existence and belief in God's nature. All humans are sinners, need a savior. Jesus is the only way. Bible's the word of God and historically reliable in all it affirms. Absolute truth exists and is grounded in God. The purpose of life is to know, love, and serve God. And then success is understood through faithful obedience to God. It seems like those things would be common sense. Well, in 2022, Barna showed that only 6% of Americans hold a biblical worldview. A year later, in 23, only 4% hold a biblical worldview. And you're thinking, boy, we better get back to the churches, the pastors. 37% of American pastors hold a biblical worldview. But when you look at evangelical and non denominational pastors, 51 to 57% hold a biblical worldview. We're supposed to be excited about that now and throw a party. That just over half of our evangelical pastors know what they're talking about. And so many of our churches are so captured by the fetishes and fads of the time. And they look through the lens of sociology and culture instead of theology and scripture, that what they amount to is skinny jeans and fog machines on Sunday mornings. No wonder we're losing our future. And parents, it's so difficult when you think, well, the parents need to be taking this on their own responsibility because they can't trust in many of the pastors. Some of them are really good pastors. I don't want to throw everyone under the bus, but you can't hand your kids over to the pastors. Just a minute, my computer is ready to go out and
Yeah,
realize
you're
this.
good.
You can't hand your kids over to the pastors, especially if the pastors are not equipping the kids to be able to face off with the things that they are being confronted with. And when I say that, let me just give you the statistics here. Sorry, I'm going to plug this in. The statistics on professors, liberal to conservative, the ratio is 12 to 1. It used to be 2.3 to 1 in the mid 90s. It's now 12 to 1 for those who are retiring. It's 23 to 1 for those who just got tenure and have 20, 30 years ahead of them. And It is 27-1 in New England, where the Ivy Leagues are at, and where a lot of this craziness is all over the news. And every time I tell that story, the statistics, invariably you get a parent that, maybe the wife elbows the husband and says, "We need to make sure Johnny at least takes a religious studies class when they're there." I say, "No, that's the worst. It's 70-1 there." At Yale last month, they revealed in their social sciences and humanities, it's 78-1. That's Democrat versus Republican. That doesn't mean the Republican's even conservative. That doesn't mean he's even Christian, but he's the only thing you've got there. This is a veritable monolith. It's a monopoly of an ideology that's subversive to Christianity. So that parents and grandparents are literally paying for the apostasy of their own children as they send them off to these secular baptismal fonts. No thanks to many of the pastors who wouldn't even equip the parents. Now, again, I don't want to throw all under the bus, because pastoral work is hard. They're under a lot of stress. Parents are now working, both husband and wife have jobs. Part of that is we've done it ourselves. Part of it is maybe we've voted for economic packages through our voting system that has created an economy that we both need to work. In either case, parents are exhausted. You get home, nonetheless, you're still tasked with train the child up in the way they should go. And when they get older, they get conscripted to work for the other side unless you have prepared them. And so this is where, yes, in the book, I get to this point where I say, what are we going to do about this? We need a third revolution. We need to re-infiltrate the universities. We need institutional recapture. But not everyone is called to go into the universities. Some of us are. Everyone needs to be prepared for the ideologies coming out of the universities, because politics is downstream from culture, culture from education, and the apex of education is the university. That's where the battle is at, right? And people say, "Oh no, the church is the most influential." No, it's really not, for a couple of reasons. Um, One of them is that, again, recent statistic, the average number of Americans going to church is 30%.
Yeah.
Almost weekly is 39%. But exactly 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds are registered for college. If you go every week to church, you get 52 sermons a year. The average college freshman will get 60 sermons in the first month, and it's not from a pastor. So who really has the ear? And now we can know why. We look at the demographics of Gen Z and see that 41% of them were sympathetic with Luigi Mangione and his shooting of that CEO, Brian Thompson of United Healthcare, in December. And the move towards socialism with Gen Z and things like that. The closer you are in proximity to the epicenter of these bad ideas, the more it's influencing you. And so we're losing generation after generation after generation. So we need to show that Christianity is good for the world, that it's reasonable, and that it's true. That's where Ratio Christi or other movements come in that are apologetically oriented. And then I focus intently on a clarion call to parachurches, parents, grandparents, professors, educators, um, political allies, um, philanthropists and donors. Stop funding those who hate you, and prayers. All the big revivals taking place that were revolutionary in their own ways, from Azusa Street down in Southern California to Asbury in Kentucky to Yale and to Wittenberg, where Dr. Martin Luther, at his university, began a little revival, a little reformation, a little revolution. These almost invariably take place in conjunction with the college campus. That is ground zero. That needs to be where everybody is focused. Even if you're not going to go there, you need to know what's happening there to prepare your students and your flocks.
So, how are you guys received on campus by professors and staff? I mean, do you get any pushback when you guys want to start a new chapter at a university that may not have one yet?
Yeah, I'm expecting this semester, starting in the next couple of weeks, to have numerous new cases with courts. Last August, we had no less than a dozen in August. At any one time, I've got 3 to 6 inquiries going on. Um, we have 150 legal inquiries, 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, and in December we gave Joe Biden a going away present after 4 years of litigation there with the Department of Education. And so, yeah, we are constantly called on to do something that's not part of what our organization is normally oriented to, and that is giving these um, centers of education continuing education about this little piece of parchment called the U.S. Constitution. And so elections do matter, and it makes a world of difference. In fact, we won the one with the Department of Education because their attorneys looked over and saw what happened in the Ninth Circuit in California. We had been kicked off those Cal State campuses for 6 years, but we filed an amicus brief with the Fellowship for Christian Athletes, I think that it was. And Trump's first term changed the judiciary in the Ninth Circuit so that we didn't have to wait for a different circuit to go against the Ninth and meet at the Supreme Court. We were able to win the case in the Ninth Circuit and get us all back on campuses.
Mm.
So yeah, it's constant. Me personally, I was an ethics professor, had a former pastor who turned gay, charged me with creating a suicidal environment at Indiana University, and I had to have 2 of my atheist students came in to defend me and threaten the university that while they had recorded all my lectures on flash drive, if the university wouldn't even listen to my lectures and they turned around and punished me for some reason, then these students were going to leave and go to a free thinking university, one that actually educates, not indoctrinates. So Alliance Defending Freedom took my case pro bono there. I was exonerated. I've been canceled from Toronto to Purdue to other schools personally. So yeah, it's cancel culture is rooted in this Marxist revolution. Some of the new atheists who no longer want to deal with the new atheism and they're sorry, like Richard Dawkins, who wants to go on the apology tour and wants to call himself a cultural Christian now. They want to be our friends because they've been canceled.
Yeah.
And they realize that their man was someone, forgetting the name right now. Uh, I may defend, I would defend, I may disagree with what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it, right? The deist who said that. Um, they would agree with that. But the statement coming out of someone like Stalin is ideas are more powerful than weapons. We don't allow our enemies to have weapons, so why should we let them have ideas?
Mm-hmm.
The root of cancel culture that is illiberal, that is authoritarian, is not welcome news to the classical atheist liberal who is now being ousted himself um, by this new movement. And this explains exactly why you're finding presidential candidates from the Democrat Party that are now serving on the cabinet of the Republican presidency, or Elon Musk, who's a transhumanist and has 12 or 120 kids, I don't know, out of wedlock, doing his part to repopulate, I guess. But he believes in freedom and free thinking and started X, and he voted for Obama and Biden. But why is he doing this? Caitlyn Jenner, Bill Maher, what in the world is going on there? Joe Rogan, because there is a revolution taking place and it's everywhere. And once you see it and you understand what postmodern cultural Marxism is, and if you need the education, I've got the book on it. Once you understand it, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere. And if you think that we're just going to send our kids off to the Christian schools, no, it's there. I can tell you about a lot of the seminaries, and I do in here as well. And these universities are training our doctors, our lawyers, our media, our K through 12 educators. So it's not just that literally, and this is a fact, 1/3 of world leaders, prime ministers, presidents, dictators, get at least one academic degree from a U.S. university. So that as goes the university, so goes the culture, and as goes the U.S. university, so goes the world. But the K through 12 are being educated by Marxists. And unless you have a PhD, and even then, sometimes you don't recognize it. the fourth most cited author in the social sciences is Paulo Freire. Well, he's got Critical Pedagogy, best-selling book. He was a Brazilian Marxist. His stuff is what is going through all of the colleges of education. These schools are Freirean schools, and most people don't even recognize it, even if Christians are the ones teaching at those schools. So people need to understand the PH behind the D, and they need to get educated. You can't beware of false philosophy unless you're aware of what it is. And so that's where, as a trained philosopher and theologian, I get into it in the book, The Progressive Miseducation of America, and help people to understand what just happened to the country. Look no further than the universities. Well, didn't we start those? Yes. Well, how did we lose them? I'll show you. Well, then how do we reclaim this? How do we turn this around? Well, there's got to be some level of institutional recapture. We have to be thinking about storming the beaches of Normandy, not with pitchforks and torches, but a good, solid, strategic game plan that is thinking about the long game, while at the same time, pastors getting rid of the fog machines and pulling out the Bible again, and parents, in spite of their exhaustion, educating their kids as though their lives depend on it,
Mm-hmm.
and using organizations that have resources to help them. We're a parachurch, Shanda. We like to help other campus ministries. And so we have these booklets. Don't have one sitting on my desk, but you can go to, I'll give you a website in a little bit, that we have this product line now that are authored by almost all PhDs at the highest level, like William Lane Craig, who has 2 doctorates. One of them was on the evidence for the resurrection, 600 pages. And we said, give us that in 25 pages, 11th grade reading level will make you famous. Stephen Meyer, who's written 5 recent 500-page books. And we said jokingly, Steve, no one's going to want to read your dumb 500-page books, even though Joe Rogan invited you on as the first Christian intellectual in over 2,000 episodes, and you made an impact. But instead of 500 pages, give us that in 25 pages at the 11th grade reading level, and we'll make you famous. So we did. Everything from classical apologetics on the problem of why does God allow evil, to the reliability of the Bible, science and scripture, to the cultural apologetics issues, trans, sex, race, class, all of that kind of stuff. And those books are written not only by PhDs, but a former trans, former gay, former feminist, I would say former black, but current black, right? We've got the classical and the cultural apologetics issues coming to bear in formats that are digital and printable. People go to our website, they can download all 50 of these for free on PDF if they want it readable to format on whatever device they're on. Buy the EPUB version or get the printed booklets. We have professors from Sean McDowell at Biola that order these to philosophers in Alabama, at Purdue, engineers at another school. These are for anyone from high school, churches, all the way to professors. They're an excellent resource, and you can go to ratio.link slash PMA for Progressive Miseducation of America. Ratio.link slash PMA.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. That's awesome. And speaking on the shift, I don't think I've seen a more like clear shift in this whole cultural revolution that we're speaking of until this past election, where, like you said, you have Elon Musk who like vote for Trump, Joe Rogan. They're not conservative men, like you had said. But now I was like, okay, so what does that mean for the other party? What does that mean for the Democrat Party? I mean, are they going to go learn their lesson and go to the middle? No, you have over the last month Zorn Mandani and running for mayor of New York City, and he's an outright Marxist. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like abolish property ownership. We're going to have grocery stores where you go in and you get like, I don't know, free food. Oh, it's astounding. Like my mind is blown. So for me, it's like you see the shift. Now you have a party that is gravitating towards just plain out Marxism, and you have the ones who are like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan and, Richard Dawkins and others who say, I'm going to go down with all the other people that are leaning more conservative Republican because this stuff's just too wild for me. And, but it's not like, sometimes you could say, if you're on this one side of it, you could be like, well, I'm hopeful. That's great. But when you see the other side being replaced by straight up Marxism, socialism, things like that, it's not comforting because it has shifted more so when you look at it that way in the wrong direction. If you have a whole party being replaced by this thought outright, whereas before at least they would try to cover it up knowing it wasn't popular.
Right.
Now it's just being bold enough to say it right here on a mic, and people vote for the guy, which I heard statistically speaking, it was more of the white people in New York City who voted for Mamdani than it was any other demographic. And I hadn't checked in that statistic, but I'm like, I don't know. It's to me, it's just I just have this like what? Like it's just I'm trying to process it all because it's just that crazy to me, like unthinkable and in a way. But what I'm also curious to know about is what were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
That's one of the tags that I do in the book is I tag political alliances too and talk about how FDR and Churchill had to look at Stalin and say, okay, you're dangerous. We don't like you, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We're keeping one eye open while we sleep, but we'll deal with you later. Right now, there's this other guy in town called Adolf, got a little mustache. Well, I have traveled at universities as a speaking partner with Peter Boghossian, who is my arch enemy in metaphysics. He wrote the book A Manual for Creating Atheists, forward by Richard Dawkins. And he and I were allies on lecturing on viewpoint diversity, the death of intellectual diversity in the universities. Why? Because he's getting canceled by the woke mob. Richard Dawkins lost the Humanist of the Year award that was given to him 25 years ago because he dared compare transgenderism with transracialism, because we have real cases of people who say they're a white black person trapped in a white person's body, or people who say that they're transabled and they really think of themselves as being blind. And so they'll find a psychiatrist or psychologist to help them understand how to use liquid Drano and blind themselves. These are real cases. You can just Google this stuff and look at the interviews with them. It's transspeciesism, transracialism, trans crazyism. But this is part of the postmodern zeitgeist, and the cultural Marxist part of it is a radical revolutionary element. And those two things coming together. So they mess with the language, and then they come through and they subvert and infiltrate. And even those guys who thought they were friends with them, like a Chuck Schumer, a Nancy, whatever her name is, Speaker of the House,
Nancy
Pelosi,
Pelosi, yeah.
or Chuck, or Bill Maher, all of those kinds of guys. You've got Richard Dawkins now, who wants to be a cultural Christian. Elon Musk, a cultural Christian. Jordan Peterson wants to be an existentialist Christian. Tom Holland, an agnostic Christian. It's like it's cool to be a cultural Christian now instead of a net negative, someone in the sticks and somewhere that can't read or whatever, and they're just cultural and they don't really believe this stuff. Well, because these guys have now been able to compare 5 or 10 years on the ground of not just what Islamism might do, but Marxism, what it's done in our own country to their own political party, in their own universities where they've reigned for over 100 years. And then the new atheists uh, tapped onto that another 20 years, that reign of terror with Richard Dawkins as the Robespierre of the French Revolution, and created the guillotine. And then, like Robespierre, Dawkins gets guillotined by his own guillotine. So that Peter Boghossian, if I remember correctly, in a conversation, he said something like this: I talked with Richard and said, if you're not careful, you're going to be speaking only at Ratio Christi campuses, because only we would let them, right? You're finding this woke infiltration getting into campus ministries. I get into that in the book as well. Into churches and campus ministries and churches, Christian academic societies. And it's really an odd time that we can find allies like I did with Peter Boghossian more than I could with other Christian pastors or thinkers who are somehow like the pastors of the German church conscripted to be working for the other side. But instead of a swastika, it's the hammer and sickle.
Mm. Mm. Sometimes people use the word failing. The education system is failing our kids. Use the word misguided. What is, or miseducation? Miseducation. What's the difference? Like, I like that word miseducation because they're being educated.
They are, yep. And miss is bad, bad education. Um, Education is informing into the mind someone else. This is bad information. So, as Richard Weaver taught us, ideas have consequences, but as we've come to see, bad ones have victims. Good ones can create human flourishing. And this is where, the classical liberals, they want an alliance right now, to fight against something worse that's kicked them out and taken over what they thought that was going to be theirs forever. And now they've, joined the company. We've been here for a century already, when you kicked us out. And so with those new alliances, we need to be able to fight the education. We need to re-educate people, help them to see this miseducation, this bad philosophy that's happening. And there are different schemas out there, different theories, different strategies. We should start new universities. We should go into the trades and forget the educations. Look, you can't just continue to retreat. As much as I liked Rod Dreher's books, I call him Rod Dreary, um, because he gives this impression that the culture war is over, we have lost, and like the 80s when all these home bunkers were there under the ground, ready for a nuclear war and fallout. The idea is we need to train our families and our cell groups and go underground and prepare for the fallout that'll obliterate civilization. And then when it's done, we'll come back up and we'll restart civilization. No, no, no. Where are you going to go? We need to not have that defeatist attitude. Look, it may seem impossible, but I prove this in my book that what is actual entails what is possible. If the universities were launched for 2 centuries as being Christ-centered, and then for reasons that we talk about in here, we lost them. They were overcome by a minority that pushed them out, and now this majority has been pushed out by the next revolution that's come in. It means that it can happen again. And when I interviewed someone like Al Mohler for the book, he was an example of someone who took a liberal Southern Baptist seminary of the 6 seminaries in their arsenal, and he recaptured it and made it a conservative seminary. It's proof that an institution can be recaptured. And what Alvin Plantinga has done in the field of philosophy, which is almost, I think, short of a miracle. We've got so many Christian philosophers in there. We've established a beachhead in one of the most important of the disciplines, the PH behind all the D's. This needs to happen. And we have a game plan doing it. And unfortunately, I can't get some Christians to support it, but I've got a Hollywood agnostic who's given us a sizable amount of money to fund Christian PhD students going into top schools, because this person was sick of the wokeness in Hollywood and thought a best way to stem the tide is by funding Christian academics long term as a bulwark against something like that. So people need to look at the resources, realize the problem that's happening. You can't keep pouring chlorine downstream in politics. You've got to go upstream. The problem is in the university. The politics is nice right now. It seems like DEI or DIE is on retreat. I'm just telling you, as someone inside of the universities and have been there for 30 years, on the inside, outside, top, bottom, it is lipstick on a pig. Harvard has 100 DEI or DIE officers, political commissars, that's all they do for 40 hours a week. They've not had a come to Jesus moment. Look, UPenn was in the news. Luigi Mangione, who shot that CEO, was a graduate from there. They're president couldn't say that genocide against the Jews was wrong. They had to leave. Now they're working with Trump on some stuff. Here's a book. You talked about abolish private property. Here's a Marxist professor, a feminist at UPenn, abolish the family.
Mm.
They're serious about this. That New York mayor is serious about this. A manifesto for care and liberation. You go to Yale Divinity School, not just Yale University, Yale Divinity School. Queer theology, where she discusses in here, she's got a mohawk, she's a systematic theologian, a lesbian systematic theologian. And in her class that she teaches based on this, she tells her students, we're not going to be studying theology, we're going to be studying theory, Theo, theos, queer theory. And we're going to be talking about queering God and queering Christianity. This stuff is filtering down. And unless we reclaim the highest levels, all we're doing is putting chlorine downstream. It'll be clear for about a month. And then after that, the dirty water's coming back into it. If you want to change the culture, change the university. As go the universities, so goes the culture. As goes the US university, so goes the world.
Mm. Yeah, I like that you encourage us to stay in the fight because I feel like if if the raw dreary, I like that you said that. That's funny. If it's true, you go down into your bunkers and just lost the war, go down in your bunkers, let the culture play itself out, then go back up. It's like, then why would Jesus give us the Great Commission to go out into all the nations and preach the gospel, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey my commands? It's like, he doesn't say, except if the culture is really hard and you feel like you've lost the war, then go into your bunkers and wait it out. It's like that never expires, the Great Commission. So I totally agree. And that's why I said sometimes as a parent, you're like, no, I don't want my kids to go into that battlefield. I'm afraid of what, they might encounter. But I feel like as a parent, if you've been discipling your kids and you've poured into them and then you let them go, there's a thing about trusting. Even I tell myself this, and I still talk to my boys about it. I have to trust the Lord. I have to trust that I parented you the way that I was supposed to. And I have to trust you that you learn the lessons and that you're going to take those and own your own relationship with the Lord, because you're not going to keep your kids from the world. Like, sure, you can keep them from going into a university, but they're going to go into a workplace. They're going to go into, we live in the dang world where we're not,
You,
we
you
always say
can't even
you're
go
not
into
in it,
your
you're of it.
closets. You
Yeah,
have this in your
exactly.
closet.
Very good point. Very good point. So that should be encouraging, like to know that a we have a responsibility, but with the Lord, we have we're equipped. We have everything that we need. We just do not want to run and wave our white flags and surrender and say, well, I'm not going to do it. And you guys are doing great work. I mean, thank you so much for all that you guys do to be on those campuses, to go through those, legal battles and have the conversations that you're having with these young kids, to be literally a light in the midst of what seems like such darkness. That's not an easy thing to dedicate your lives to. And a lot of times there's only like one or two leaders and a co-leader on campus, right? I mean, it's not even like you guys are spread out and dispersed throughout the
Right.
nation. It's not like you're all in one hub and you get to go give each other a pep talk on a
We,
Friday to
we
keep
need
going.
more to join the movement. That's right.
Yes, exactly. Well,
And if
thank you.
anyone's listening, if they're a church or anything like that, a campus, a conference, a retreat, I'm going on a speaking tour for the next 12 to 24 months. Invite me into your audience and let me try to be the herald, the John the Baptist, the Paul Revere, and let you know what's coming so that you can adequately equip against it. You can't run from it. You must face it.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, Corey. So on those terms, go ahead and tell us where we can find you and follow you and reach out and get in touch.
Yeah, it's ratiochristi.org. But if you want to go and see the one stop everything in relation to the book and the booklets I talked about, and bringing me in as a speaker potentially, we made it easy. It's ratio, like mathematical ratio, ratio.link/PMA for Progressive Miseducation of America.
Nice.
PMA. ratio.link/PMA.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you guys, I will make sure all of the links are in the show notes. I will even have them down in the description when you listen to this podcast. Go look up Corey if you need somebody to come on, to your church, to your college campus, to your school, wherever, whatever area, your community, that you have access to a stage and a mic, or just a meeting when gathering a group of people together that need to hear this information. Contact Corey. You heard the wisdom that he has to share, the knowledge. More people need to be aware of this so we know what we can do. And if you have any questions for him, you can find him at those links. You can reach out, get his book. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me at hello@shandafulbright.com. And I hope this encouraged you. I hope it motivated you. And I'll catch you on the next one.